Imagine discovering a medieval device so scientifically sophisticated in its cruelty that it could keep human beings alive and conscious for up to 2 weeks while subjecting them to systematic torture that was carefully calibrated to cause maximum suffering without allowing the merciful escape of death or unconsciousness. This wasn't a crude instrument of random violence, but a precision-engineered machine that represented the pinnacle of medieval medical and engineering knowledge applied to the problem of prolonging human agony through the systematic manipulation of pain tolerance, vital sign monitoring, and life support systems that would maintain consciousness even as the victim's body was slowly destroyed over an extended period. What makes this revelation even more horrifying is learning that the device incorporated advanced understanding of human physiology, psychology, and pharmacology that allowed operators to control not just the intensity of torture, but its exact duration, ensuring that victims would experience every moment of their systematic destruction, while medical intervention prevented the quick death that might provide relief from their calculated suffering. The device known as the Prolonged Suffering Engine represented medieval torture technology's most sophisticated achievement in the science of maintaining life during extended torture, incorporating advanced medical monitoring systems, mechanical precision controls, and pharmacological interventions that could keep victims alive and conscious for periods that exceeded all previous concepts of human endurance while they experienced systematic destruction of their bodies and minds. Unlike conventional torture devices that risked accidentally killing their victims through shock, blood loss, or organ failure, the Prolonged Suffering Engine was engineered with multiple backup systems and automated controls that could detect when a victim was approaching death and immediately provide medical intervention to stabilize their condition while maintaining optimal levels of pain and consciousness throughout the extended ordeal. The device incorporated real-time monitoring of vital signs, including heart rate, blood pressure, breathing patterns, and neurological responses that fed information to mechanical systems that could automatically adjust torture parameters to maintain the victim within a narrow range of suffering that would maximize pain while preventing death. The construction of the Prolonged Suffering Engine required extraordinary technical expertise that combined the most advanced medieval knowledge of anatomy, engineering, chemistry, and medicine into a single integrated system that could apply multiple forms of torture simultaneously while providing life support that would sustain the victim through weeks of systematic destruction. The device consisted of a complex framework that could position victims in various configurations while applying controlled pressure, heat, cold, chemical agents, and mechanical stress to different parts of their bodies according to predetermined schedules that were designed to maintain peak pain levels while preventing adaptation or psychological numbing that might reduce their suffering. The mechanical systems included precision hydraulics that could apply graduated pressure to specific body parts, heating and cooling elements that could create thermal stress without causing fatal tissue damage, and chemical delivery systems that could introduce pain-enhancing drugs or prevent infection that might cause premature death from sepsis or other complications. The medical knowledge that enabled weeks-long torture survival demonstrates how healing expertise had been completely perverted to serve the goal of prolonging suffering rather than preserving life for beneficial purposes, with teams of physicians contributing their understanding of human physiology to ensure that victims could endure extended periods of systematic torture without dying from their injuries. The medical team would include specialists in circulation management who could maintain blood flow to vital organs while allowing controlled bleeding from extremities, respiratory experts who could ensure adequate oxygen delivery despite chest compression and lung damage, and specialists in pain management who could enhance rather than relieve suffering through the strategic application of drugs that would increase nerve sensitivity while preventing unconsciousness. The most sophisticated medical intervention involved the use of primitive stimulants and circulation enhancers that could keep victims conscious and responsive even when their bodies were approaching the normal limits of human endurance. The systematic scheduling of torture phases over extended periods required sophisticated understanding of human adaptation mechanisms and pain tolerance patterns that allowed operators to vary the intensity and type of torture to prevent psychological accommodation that might reduce the victim's suffering over time. The torture schedule would typically begin with relatively mild discomfort that would gradually intensify over the first several days, while the victim's pain sensitivity was enhanced through sleep deprivation, nutritional manipulation, and psychological conditioning that would make subsequent torture more effective. The middle period would feature the most intense torture phases that took advantage of the victim's weakened physical and mental state, while medical monitoring ensured that vital signs remained stable enough to continue the ordeal. The final phase would involve systematic escalation toward death that would be prevented only by intensive medical intervention that would keep the victim alive until the predetermined completion of their torture schedule. The life support systems integrated into the prolonged suffering engine represent some of the most advanced medieval applications of medical technology to the problem of maintaining consciousness during extreme trauma, demonstrating how healing knowledge could be corrupted to serve systematic cruelty rather than promoting recovery and wellness. The life support included automated feeding systems that could provide precisely calculated nutrition to maintain basic metabolic functions while preventing the strength or energy that might allow resistance or escape attempts, hydration management that could maintain fluid balance while concentrating urine to increase kidney stress and discomfort, and circulation support that could maintain blood flow to vital organs while allowing controlled tissue damage in non-essential areas. The most sophisticated systems included primitive ventilation assistance that could ensure adequate oxygenation even when chest compression or lung damage would normally cause unconsciousness or death from respiratory failure. The psychological techniques employed during extended torture were designed to prevent any form of mental escape or adaptation that might provide relief from physical suffering, with specialized operators who understood how to manipulate consciousness and maintain psychological vulnerability throughout weeks of systematic destruction. The psychological torture included systematic destruction of hope through detailed explanations of how much time remained in the ordeal, manipulation of time perception through sensory deprivation and disorientation techniques that made hours feel like days, and deliberate triggering of survival instincts that would keep victims psychologically engaged with their suffering rather than retreating into dissociation or catatonia that might provide mental protection. The most effective psychological manipulation involved creating false hopes for relief or rescue that would be systematically destroyed to maintain emotional volatility and prevent psychological adaptation to their circumstances. The documentation and monitoring systems associated with extended torture created detailed records of every aspect of the victim's physical and psychological deterioration, while serving as institutional memory that could be used to refine and improve future torture operations for maximum effectiveness and duration. Every vital sign measurement, pain response, and psychological reaction would be carefully recorded and analyzed to identify optimal torture techniques and timing patterns that could be applied to future victims, while the records also served as proof of the torture's effectiveness for authorities who wanted evidence that their punishments were achieving maximum deterrent impact. The documentation included detailed medical charts that tracked the progression of various injuries and systemic damage, while noting which interventions were most effective at maintaining consciousness and prolonging survival during extreme trauma. The economic costs of extended torture operations were enormous, requiring specialized personnel, sophisticated equipment, ongoing medical supplies, and facility maintenance that made each 2-week torture session equivalent in cost to major public works projects or military campaigns. The personnel costs included not only the torture specialists and medical staff, but also security personnel, equipment technicians, supply coordinators, and administrative officials who were required to maintain the complex logistical arrangements necessary for extended torture while ensuring that proper procedures were followed throughout the lengthy ordeal. The medical supplies required for life support during extended torture included drugs that were expensive and difficult to obtain, specialized equipment that required ongoing maintenance and replacement, and consumable materials that had to be constantly resupplied to maintain the systems that kept victims alive during their ordeal. The international reputation of extended torture capabilities influenced diplomatic relations and international law in ways that demonstrated how extreme torture practices could become diplomatic weapons that affected foreign policy through the threat of consequences that exceeded all conventional concepts of punishment or deterrence. Foreign governments would sometimes modify their policies specifically to avoid the risk of their citizens being subjected to extended torture that would create ongoing diplomatic incidents and international embarrassment for weeks or months, rather than ending quickly with conventional execution. The reputation for systematic prolonged torture influenced international negotiations and trade relationships while contributing to the development of diplomatic customs that recognized certain forms of punishment as unacceptable, even in an era when extreme violence was routinely employed for political purposes. The few documented survivor accounts of partial extended torture provide heartbreaking evidence of the long-term physical and psychological effects of experiencing systematic torture designed to last for weeks while maintaining consciousness throughout the entire ordeal. Survivors described the experience as existing in a state of constant present tense suffering, where time became meaningless while pain became the only reality, with many reporting that they could recall every moment of their extended torture years after the experience had ended. The physical recovery from extended torture often took months or years and was frequently incomplete, with survivors suffering from chronic pain conditions, mobility problems, and organ damage that served as permanent reminders of their ordeal. The psychological effects were often more devastating than the physical injuries, with survivors developing severe post-traumatic stress disorders, dissociative conditions, and complete inability to trust other human beings that made normal social functioning impossible for the remainder of their lives. The technological innovations that emerged from extended torture research influenced broader developments in medical technology, life support systems, and precision manufacturing that demonstrated how advanced knowledge gained through systematic cruelty could contribute to legitimate scientific and technological progress, even when the original research was conducted for purely harmful purposes. The monitoring systems developed for torture applications contributed to understanding of vital sign measurement and automated medical response that influenced the development of primitive life support technology, while the precision mechanical controls developed for torture devices influenced manufacturing techniques and engineering applications that could be used for beneficial purposes. However, the fact that these advances emerged from systematic torture rather than ethical research demonstrates how technological progress could be corrupted when moral constraints were abandoned in favor of institutional objectives that prioritized control and deterrence over human welfare. The legal frameworks that governed extended torture reveal how sophisticated jurisprudence could provide institutional legitimacy for systematic cruelty, while ensuring that prolonged torture served multiple political and social functions beyond simple punishment for specific crimes. Legal procedures were developed for determining which criminals deserved extended torture rather than quick execution or conventional punishment, with specific criteria being established for crimes that warranted weeks of systematic suffering rather than immediate death. The legal documentation required for extended torture included detailed medical assessments that would predict whether victims could survive the full torture schedule while ensuring that the ordeal would serve its intended deterrent and propaganda functions. Court procedures also included provisions for medical oversight that would ensure torture was conducted according to professional standards that would maximize its effectiveness while preventing premature death that might reduce its impact. The social impact of extended torture on communities where it was practiced reveals how prolonged public torture could influence entire populations while creating shared traumatic memories that would affect community behavior and political attitudes for generations after the actual torture events had concluded. Extended torture sessions drew crowds that would gather for days or weeks to observe different phases of the victim's systematic destruction, creating festival-like atmospheres that normalized extreme cruelty while providing entertainment that made systematic torture seem socially acceptable and even enjoyable. The prolonged nature of the torture allowed for elaborate social rituals and community bonding that centered around shared participation in systematic cruelty, while the visible evidence of the victim's gradual deterioration served as ongoing education about the consequences of challenging established authority. The eventual abandonment of extended torture systems came not through humanitarian reform, but through practical recognition that the enormous resources required for weeks-long torture were becoming economically unsustainable, while their political benefits were being offset by international diplomatic costs and domestic social disruption that outweighed their value as deterrent examples. The medical personnel, sophisticated equipment and complex logistics required for extended torture made each session extraordinarily expensive to organize and execute, while the international reputation for extreme cruelty was beginning to create diplomatic isolation that affected trade relationships and political alliances. The development of more efficient methods of social control and political deterrence also reduced the perceived need for spectacular torture that consumed enormous resources while serving primarily symbolic rather than practical purposes. Perhaps most disturbing of all is how the prolonged suffering engine reveals the extraordinary human capacity for applying advanced medical and engineering knowledge to the problem of systematically prolonging human suffering through the deliberate corruption of healing expertise and technological capability to serve institutional cruelty rather than human welfare. The fact that professional communities could develop around perfecting extended torture while maintaining their sense of technical competence and institutional legitimacy demonstrates how completely moral reasoning can be overridden when systematic cruelty is presented as necessary service to legitimate authority and social order. This historical example serves as a powerful warning about the potential for human intelligence and technological advancement to serve the darkest aspects of institutional power when societies abandon moral constraints in favor of instrumental reasoning that treats individual suffering as acceptable cost for achieving abstract political goals that prioritize terror and control over human dignity and welfare. What do you think about this absolutely horrifying demonstration of how advanced medical and engineering knowledge could be systematically applied to keeping human beings alive during weeks of systematic torture designed to maximize suffering while preventing death? Can you imagine the mindset of medical professionals and engineers who would dedicate their expertise to perfecting systems for prolonging human agony while maintaining their sense of professional competence and institutional legitimacy? The fact that such sophisticated technology was developed specifically to prevent the mercy of death during extended torture really makes you wonder about the capacity for human knowledge to serve systematic cruelty when institutional authority overrides moral constraints, doesn't it? Share your thoughts in the comments about how this historical example might relate to contemporary applications of medical and technological knowledge that could be used to cause or prolong suffering while maintaining claims to legitimacy and necessity. If you found this investigation into medieval technology designed to prolong torture for weeks as disturbing and thought-provoking as I did, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more shocking revelations about how human intelligence and institutional resources can be corrupted to serve systematic cruelty rather than human welfare. Ring that notification bell because our next deep dive will explore another example of how advanced knowledge can be turned toward perfecting human suffering when societies prioritize institutional power over moral responsibility. Trust me, these stories will change how you think about the relationship between technological progress and human rights forever.